So yesterday, I did a video taking a look at the 2022 NFL rookie quarterback class and how bad it has been. We went through each player and how their career has turned out 2 years later. I got so many comments and the video has done so well that I'm going to do a video on the 2021 quarterback class. So far, there is only one quarterback drafted from that year who is going to be a starting quarterback this fall, and some argue that it is actually worse than the 2022 class. In today's video, we're going to do the same thing we did in the other one, as we're going to go through each and every quarterback who was drafted, talk about where they are now, and what has gone wrong for them. But before we get started, if you're a big college football fan, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you're going to support today's video, and let me know what team, topic, player, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and talk about the 2021 quarterback class. The first guy we're going to talk about is Sam Ehlinger. He grew up a huge die-hard fan of the Longhorns, and when his father passed away, he decided he was one day going to play quarterback for them. He ended up signing with them and was a huge recruit, and would have a great career with the Longhorns. He was both a great passer and runner, and helped lead them to the peak of the Tom Herman era. Eventually, he would enter the 2021 NFL Draft, and he was taken by the Indianapolis Colts in the 6th round. He was set to compete for the backup job with Jacob Eason, and unfortunately during preseason he would suffer an ACL sprain, but he would end up playing in 3 games for the Colts as a rookie, running the ball 3 times for 9 yards. In 2022, he saw the most playing time of his entire career, as he eventually took over for an injured Nick Foles and Matt Ryan late in the season. He'd play in a total of 4 games, actually making 3 starts. He went 17 of 23 for 200 yards in his first start, but lost a key fumble, and they lost that one. In the next game, he did run for over 100 yards and had an interception, and after that, Colts head coach Frank Reich was fired. He started 1 game under interim head coach Jeff Saturday, and didn't win that either. In total in 2022, he threw for 573 yards with 3 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. In 2023, the Colts drafted Anthony Richardson out of Florida, and they also got Shane Steichen to be their next head coach. Despite Anthony Richardson being out for most of the season, the Colts depended on Gardner Minshew instead of Sam. He was basically demoted to 3rd string quarterback, and Sam only found the field once. He didn't even have a stat. While he is still on the Colts roster, I don't know how much longer that's going to be, and I guess you could say he got an opportunity, as he did make 3 starts, but honestly, Sam Ehlinger was never really supposed to be a future franchise quarterback. What he's done is exactly what we all expected. Next up, we have Ian Book. Like Ehlinger, Book was just a good college quarterback. Coming out of high school, he was only a 3-star player, and was never really supposed to do a whole lot at Notre Dame. He'd end up having his best season in 2020, and eventually he was taken in the 4th round of the 2021 NFL Draft. He was by no means a franchise player, but he did at least have some potential. Unfortunately, Book has done absolutely nothing. He ended up being actually named the starting quarterback late in the 2021 season, thanks to a bunch of injuries. He was the 4th quarterback who played that year, and he threw for 135 yards with 2 interceptions. He didn't improve much over the offseason or the preseason in 22, and the Saints would eventually choose to release him. He spent 2022 as the backup for the Philadelphia Eagles, and then signed with the Patriots practice squad for a few days in 2023. He would stay a free agent until January of 2024, or apparently the Chiefs have signed him to a reserves contract. Book was never expected to do anything, but I guess you could say at least he got a chance to start, but he didn't make the most of it. We now get to our first guy who actually had a legitimate amount of hype coming into the draft. At one point, Davis Mills was actually a 5-star recruit and the top-ranked quarterback in his high school class. It's kind of shocking, to be honest. He ended up deciding to go over to Stanford, where he was the prototypical Stanford quarterback. He had a large frame, had a good arm, and fit most NFL offenses. Despite somewhat mediocre stats while he was at Stanford, he was eventually drafted by the Texans in the 3rd round. He would back up Deshaun Watson and Tyrod Taylor at first, but once Deshaun was ruled inactive, and Tyrod Taylor got hurt in week 2, Davis Mills got a chance to see the field early. He ended up making the most of it at least, as in his first start, he threw for over 100 yards with a touchdown and a pick. He was named the starter the following week, throwing for 168 yards and a touchdown. He'd play pretty inconsistently throughout the rest of the season, becoming the backup once again when Tyrod came back. Davis was on and on throughout his rookie year, and actually set the Texans record for most passing yards as a rookie with 2,664. He also had 16 touchdowns, but then also had 10 costly interceptions in 13 total games. In 2022, the Browns would trade for Deshaun Watson, leaving Davis Mills as the starting quarterback for the entirety of the year. Unfortunately, he could not get it together, as he was eventually benched in favor of Kyle Allen in week 12. He once again would become the starter in week 14, and finished the 2022 campaign with 17 touchdowns with 15 interceptions. He did throw for over 3,000 yards, but the Texans only won 3 games with him as the starter, and then decided to draft CJ Stroud in the 2023 NFL Draft. As we all know, CJ turned out to be a pretty good quarterback, and Davis returned to being a backup in Houston. He played in a total of 6 games in 2023, throwing for 173 yards and 2 touchdowns. With the young quarterback movement going on in the league, I expect the Texans are probably going to ship him away at some point, and there's no reason why they shouldn't build completely around Stroud. Davis Mills got his opportunity, but like a lot of guys on this list, he was not able to run with it. The next guy on the list is Kell M. Coming out of IMG Academy, Mond was a 5-star recruit at one point and was the next big thing at Texas A&M. Unfortunately, in my opinion, he never lived up to the potential I thought he had, and while he had a really good season in 2020, I just never thought he could really put it all together. After having some early first-round hype in the 2020 season, he never lived up to it and was eventually drafted by the Minnesota Vikings in the 3rd round. He ended up doing okay in the preseason, but was listed as the team's 3rd-string quarterback behind Kirk Cousins and Sean Mannion for the regular season. He'd finally make his first appearance in Week 17 when Kirk Cousins was ruled out and Mannion got hurt. Mond would throw a total of 3 passes, completing 2 of them for 5 yards. The Vikings ended up losing that game. What's really sad is they gave up on him pretty quickly, as he was cut before the start of the 2022 season and didn't even make the Vikings practice squad. He was claimed off waivers by the Cleveland Browns, but never really found playing time there. The Browns drafted Dorian Thompson-Robinson going into 2023, leaving him even further down on the depth chart, so he got released again. But since Josh Dobbs was traded to the Cardinals, the Browns decided to re-sign him, then cut him, and then sign him to the practice squad. After that, he was signed to the Indianapolis Colts practice squad, but was not re-signed once the season was over, leaving him as a free agent. Honestly, I don't really know what happened here. I don't think Mond was ever really that good as a quarterback, and it really showed when he got to the highest level. He's always a guy who was somewhat underwhelming to me, so I never understood the hype to begin with. But again, what do I know? The next guy we need to talk about was also a fringe future franchise quarterback who had a really good 2020 season in the SEC. That was Kyle Trask. In case you guys don't already know, both him and De'Aaron King were on the same high school team, but Trask was actually his backup. He ended up throwing really well and would impress Dan Mullen at Florida, so he offered him a late scholarship. Trask would go to Florida and would at first sit behind Felipe Franks before breaking out after Franks literally broke his leg. Trask had a great 2019 and 2020 season, which included getting into the SEC Championship and putting up huge numbers with Kyle Pitts and Kadarius Toney. Because of his big 2020 season, he ended up being drafted in the 2nd round to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He'd become the backup to Tom Brady, and there was some hype there, as not only did he fit the profile for a future franchise player, but he'd be sitting behind the greatest to ever do it. If Trask could sit there and develop, maybe he could become something. Unfortunately, he'd play very inconsistent throughout preseason in 2021, struggling in his first 2 games, but then having a really good 3rd preseason against the Texans, throwing for 146 yards and a touchdown. He did not play at all during the 2021 regular season, as Tom Brady was never hurt. But some thought that when Tom would retire, that Kyle would take over. He continued to play in the 2022 preseason, but he didn't really find his way up the depth chart and was even demoted to 3rd string behind Blaine Gabbert. In 2022, the Bucs went 8-9 and would eventually lose in the wild card to the Cowboys, but Kyle did make his first regular season appearance, throwing for 23 yards. Tom Brady retired again that offseason, but the Bucs went after Baker Mayfield instead, leaving Kyle on the bench. He did not end up doing anything meaningful in 2023, and it's unfair to call Kyle a bust because he's literally never gotten on the field, but at the same time, he clearly wasn't good enough to take over in 2023, so he'll probably just ride the bench as a backup and make a good amount of money doing that. Maybe his number will get called at some point, but that is what has happened to Kyle Trask. Now we get to the 5 guys who were drafted in the 1st round and were actually supposed to be the faces of their franchise. The first one was Mac Jones. He was both a late riser at Bama and a late riser coming out of high school, as he was originally a 3-star recruit who was committed to Kentucky, but would flip to Nick Saban near signing day. He'd end up being a backup for a couple of years, but when Tua would get hurt late in the 2019 season, Mac would have to step up, and then he had a huge 2020 season in which he was a Heisman finalist. He played so well with Steve Sark as the offensive coordinator that the Patriots took him at the 15th overall pick. He would end up having a really good preseason in New England and was named their starting quarterback before the regular season even started. In his first start, he threw for nearly 300 yards and a touchdown against the Dolphins, setting the NFL record for completion percentage for a rookie in their first start. In 17 games with the Pats, he led them to a 10-7 record and a berth in the playoffs. Overall, his first season was good enough to get him invited to the Pro Bowl, as he threw for 3,800 yards with 22 touchdowns and 13 interceptions. He was the only rookie quarterback to make the playoffs and the Pro Bowl that season, but everything would go downhill from there. 2022 saw his offensive coordinator Josh McDaniels leave for the Raiders, and his new offensive coordinator was Matt Patricia. He only won 1 of his first 5 games, and he also got hurt. At one point, he was even replaced by rookie Bailey Zappi, and when he returned, he struggled and was again replaced by Bailey. He was inconsistent for the rest of the year, with just under 3,000 passing yards and 14 touchdowns with 11 interceptions. In 2023, the wheels would really come off as he struggled all season long, and the Patriots had one of the worst offenses in the NFL. He kept getting benched in favor of Zappi, and with Belichick retiring and the Pats holding the number 3 overall pick, it makes sense they're probably going to choose to move on from him. They ended up trading Jones to Jacksonville, where he will back up Trevor Lawrence. Kind of a sad fall from grace for him. The next guy we need to talk about is Justin Fields. He is a very polarizing name, but for a while, he really wasn't that big of a deal coming out of high school. He was just a 4-star recruit who was committed to Penn State, but then he would eventually blow up, becoming one of the top players in the country, and he would end up going to Georgia. He was considered a prodigy-like player, but after an interesting off-the-field incident, he would decide to transfer after one season and would go over to Ohio State. After dominant seasons in both 2019 and 2020, Fields was drafted by the Chicago Bears. That was with pick number 11, and he was originally second string behind Andy Dalton, but pretty soon he was named the starting quarterback after Dalton would get hurt. Unfortunately, the Bears would struggle around him at the beginning, and that never really changed throughout the next few years. He and the Bears would struggle for the rest of his rookie season, and they would slowly transition into using him more in the running game instead of the passing game. He ran for over 100 yards against the 49ers, but still couldn't get the passing game going. He finished his rookie season with 1,800 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. But he did also run for nearly 500 yards on the ground. In 2022, the Bears coaching staff fully embraced his running ability, but simplified their passing game because of him. Unfortunately, he actually did worse in that department than the previous season, only winning 3 games, and then he battled injuries in Week 11 and Week 17, causing him to miss a few games. He threw for just over 2,000 yards, with 17 total touchdowns, but then ended up running for over 1,100 yards. He was more of a running back than a quarterback at times, it seemed, and no one really knew what to make of him. The Bears were obviously dysfunctional, and how much of it was their fault and how much of it was Fields' fault. In 2023, he'd end up showing his best football, as he threw for 2,500 yards and 16 touchdowns, and had a career-low 9 interceptions. He was hurt in Week 6 against the Vikings, leading to their undrafted free agent rookie Tyson Bagent having to come in and replace him. Fields would not play again until Week 11, but with Caleb Williams coming up in the draft and the Bears having the number 1 overall pick, it makes sense that they're probably going to move on from Fields, and that's why they decided to move him. They ended up trading him to the Pittsburgh Steelers for a 6th-round pick, and it feels like he'll be learning under Russell Wilson in Pittsburgh for a while. I don't know if he'll necessarily get a chance there, but it is very sad to see what has happened to Fields. Up next, we need to talk about Trey Lance, the guy that pretty much everyone knew was going to be a bust from the beginning. Again, it's nothing against him, but coming out of North Dakota State, he really only had one good year under his belt, and I thought he was way too raw to really make it in the NFL. He should have been a 2nd or 3rd round developmental pick, but people shot him all the way to the top, and he was taken with the 3rd overall pick by the San Francisco 49ers. He started his career as a backup to Jimmy Garoppolo, and it looked like the 49ers were going to try to develop him behind the scenes. He threw a touchdown in his first game of the season, and in the 3rd game, he ran for 1. In the 4th game, he came in relief of Jimmy Garoppolo, and then threw for 157 yards and 2 touchdowns. He threw his first career interception the following week against Arizona, and then would suffer a high ankle sprain. After that, he'd be benched for the remainder of the season, until Jimmy G would get hurt again in Week 17. In total, Trey threw for 250 yards with 2 touchdowns and an interception. Lance ended up being named the starter in 2022, but he was hurt in Week 2 and had to miss the remainder of the season. Brock Purdy, interestingly enough, took his spot. Purdy became the future of the franchise, and then Lance was put on the trade block and was eventually shipped to Dallas to the Cowboys. He ended up becoming the backup there, and in total, he's only played in 8 NFL games since he was drafted and has thrown for 5 touchdowns with 3 interceptions. It feels like he might have been the biggest bust of the draft class, but due to his injuries, we do have to give him a little bit of slack. Still though, he definitely wasn't worth all that hype, and it's unfortunate to see where he is now. At number 2, we have Zach Wilson. At first, Wilson really wasn't that big of a deal, as coming out of the state of Utah, he wanted to go to Utah, but the Utes coaching staff wanted Jack Tuttle instead. Wilson ended up going to play for Brigham Young, and his best moment came early on in 2019, as he led them to that insane comeback against Tennessee. That game was awesome, and then he decided to blow up in 2020. He became one of the most ridiculous quarterbacks in the country, and played so well, he became the 2nd overall pick to the New York Jets. While many were skeptical about his ability long term, the Jets were extremely impressed with his arm, and the new coaching staff wanted him. He actually ended up starting out pretty strong in his debut, as he threw for 258 yards and 2 touchdowns. But his 2nd game would show that he had serious flaws, as he threw 4 interceptions, 2 of which came on his first 2 pass attempts. From there, he would continue to struggle for the rest of the year, eventually getting benched for Mike White. He returned later in the year, and did actually win a game against the Texans, but would lose 4 of his last 5 starts. He finished his rookie year with 2,300 yards, with 9 touchdowns and 11 interceptions. Somehow his 2022 season was even worse, as he had a torn meniscus in the preseason that would hold him out a few weeks, and when he returned to the field against the Steelers, he threw 2 picks, but the Jets still came behind to win. The Jets would then win 4 straight games after that, but it was done in spite of him, since he didn't throw a single touchdown in the next 3 games. Once again, he was benched for Mike White, and then even Joe Flacco. That was the same case in 2023, as he only played when Aaron Rodgers was hurt, granted which was pretty much the whole season, but now the Jets are trying to find someone to trade him to, and it seems like most of the NFL really isn't interested in what Zach has to offer. In total, Zach has thrown for 6,000 yards, 23 touchdowns, and 25 interceptions. It feels like he is definitely a bust, but technically he still is young and could have some time to save his career. I never understood why him and Lance went so high, but again, I'm not a scout. Finally, we get to the one and only guy who will be a starting quarterback this upcoming fall, and that is Trevor Lawrence. After being considered one of the best quarterback recruits in the history of football, Trevor Lawrence decided to go to Clemson instead of Georgia out of high school. It was no surprise that he had a tremendous career, lighting up Alabama as a freshman and winning an early national championship. While Trevor never got his Heisman Trophy, he was the next big thing and went number 1 overall to the Jacksonville Jaguars. He was hit with some immediate adversity, as he had a torn labrum before training camp started, but he was named the starter pretty much immediately and had some struggles early on because the Jags were the worst team in the league. He made his NFL debut in Week 1 against the Texans, where he threw for over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. But he did also have 3 picks. In their next game, he only completed 8 passes and was intercepted twice. The Jags didn't actually win until Week 6, and he ended up finishing his rookie season with 3,600 yards, 12 touchdowns, and a league-high 17 interceptions. In 2022, though, he started to show the promise he had at Clemson. He was finally able to get through, and with new head coach Doug Peterson, he was able to help them put together a special season and got a wild card spot. That wild card game he was in was crazy, though, as he threw 4 interceptions in the first half, and they were down 27-0, but Trevor would lead a crazy comeback and win the game 31-30. They would eventually lose to the Chiefs, and in total, he finished with 4,000 passing yards and 25 touchdowns, while dropping his interception numbers to 8. He also made a Pro Bowl, and in 2023, he was a little bit disappointing. He only threw for 21 touchdowns and had 14 picks, and so far he's proven he is worthy of the first overall pick, but he maybe hasn't been as good as many thought he would be. Obviously, he is still young, and many of us are impatient, but I do think Trevor will be the best one from the class, and will continue to get better each and every season. Unfortunately for everybody else, I don't see really any role for any of them, and it is really unfortunate. The best chance in my opinion is probably Justin Fields, but even that's a stretch. The 2021 class honestly is pretty terrible, and while it was really hyped up, it just fell flat and never really got going. But what do you guys think? What do you think went wrong for 4 of those 5 guys drafted in the first round? How bad is this 2021 class, and what other year or group should I take a look at next? Be sure to let me know down below, leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.